Okay, folks, who am I and why am I here? It's your buddy Mike Messier of Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. I'm doing this very exclusive special video for Monty and the Pharaoh, who have requested an AEW apologist step up to the plate and defend all things controversial for AEW. Now, to be perfectly clear, I am an independent individual. I am not under contract to Tony Khan, Richie Rich, or anyone else associated at AEW Wrestling, All Elite Wrestling. Now, for those of you that are uninformed or have been sleeping under a rock, this All Elite Wrestling has been in business for almost 2 years now, coming up on 2 years. They're on Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Eastern Time on TNT, soon to be switched to TBS. And they also have a show Friday nights at 10, also on TNT, I believe, which will, that's just a new show. They've only done 2 episodes. Now, their second episode had a bit of a moment that I'm sure as wrestling fans you've heard of. CM Punk making his big comeback, but we're not here to talk about CM Punk. We're here to discuss the crying guy in the stands, the crying man, the crying game, the crying fan. What should we call this individual? The AEW crier, the CM Punk crying guy, whatever you want to call him, whatever I want to call him. Monty of Monty and the Pharaoh fame took some issue with this individual, dare I say cyberbullying him, saying on Twitter that this gentleman should only be crying for the people in Afghanistan and the troops, and mocking and diminishing and ridiculing the tears of the AEW fan. And I laugh because, you know, here we go, folks. During this Twitter exchange, Monty, at one point, basically to defend what I said or to counter what I retorted, he said there is no crying in professional wrestling. Monty of Monty and the Pharaoh said that, Mike Monty, and I jumped in with several wonderful examples of crying in professional wrestling. As I walk towards the light, I want to show you fine folks the wonderful outdoors. I'm actually here in Jacksonville, which by default makes me an AEW expert, because as you know, AEW does a lot of shows out of Jacksonville. They did for about a year and a half. They were coming to you live every Wednesday night from Jacksonville when they were not touring because of worldwide conditions. As we know, we won't speak of that. However, I always had a good time at those shows. I started going in February of 2021. I did not go initially for fear of the worldwide issues. And what got me into the door of AEW? We'll get back to the crying in a minute. What got me into the door of AEW was the Brody Lee tribute show. Now, you probably saw some people crying at that show. I believe Tony Khan was crying, and of course Brody Lee's beloved family, his friends. There were some tears. Raw is Owen, going back to 1999 when Owen Hart his life was tragically ended prematurely during that Over the Edge pay-per-view through that horrible accident. People cried that night. Jeff Jarrett and Deborah crying. You could see the tears welling up before they had to go to that ring where their compatriot just was so tragically injured. Life-ending injuries for Owen. So Monty, you know, I have to say, Mike, you made a mistake. I mean, there are tears in professional wrestling, okay? And I pointed out, I went pretty hardcore on you all of a sudden, which is what I'm known to do on Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel, on my pro wrestling rants, my pro wrestling interviews, my Mike's Instant Movie review, of which I just left the movie theater. I go pretty fucking hardcore. I'm not afraid to take on the tough topics, to use language that might be abrasive, but it's based in honesty and in true emotion. So when you say there's no crying in professional wrestling. Well, I quickly, through the magic of Twitter, pointed out several fucking examples, of which I'll now verbally illustrate. The first one was being in a match, there was tears that most of us would know. I'm sorry, I love you. Shawn Michaels to Ric Flair, WrestleMania. I believe that was in Tampa or Orlando. Several years ago, 10 or 12 years ago at this point. Time flies. But Shawn Michaels putting the bullet into Old Yeller, Ric Flair. I believe that stands as Ric Flair's last WWF match, although he wrestled in other places after. But are you telling me that you did not see the tears in Shawn Michaels' eyes, Mike, Monty, and fans? Are you telling me that you did not see the tears in Ric Flair's eyes? And so Ric Flair gets beat, pinned, and they have to come back the next night on Raw for a good big farewell fucking party. And I'm going by memory. I'm not Googling this shit. You're telling me that you didn't see tears in Ric Flair's face, tears in everyone who congratulated Ric Flair for a career that defied all things, coming back from the plane accident in 1975 that ended the career of Johnny Valentine? You're telling me there wasn't tears there, Mike? What else, buddy? Randy Savage, Macho Man Randy Savage. Okay, I was going to go to a wrestling convention, the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, an annual event that I always went to. But I got the word that morning that Randy Macho Man Savage had passed away, and I could just not deal with the emotions of seeing all the wrestlers and all the wrestling fans that I knew would be full of tears. I could just not go to that wrestling Hall of Fame and convention that day because I could not deal with the emotions of Macho Man dying. I had to have quiet time by myself, and I could not be with the wrestling community that day, but I'm sure there was tears. I remember driving to do commentary for Top Rope Promotions one night not too long ago. And the phone call came from my buddy Tommy to tell me that, did you hear about Roddy Piper? And I said, I don't know. No, what? I know that I'm going to Top Rope Promotions where Ric Flair will be tonight as our special guest, but what about Roddy Piper? Is he coming to town? No, Roddy Piper has passed away. So that was that. Get to the show. Ric Flair was still signing autographs with a tear in his eye. With a tear in his eye, as Ric Flair had a tear in his eye at the 1992 Royal Rumble when he won the World Heavyweight title back when it meant something. Ric Flair had a tear in his eye when Roddy Piper passed away and addressed the crowd, and everyone chanted, Roddy, Roddy, Roddy. There were some tears in the eyes, Mike. I'm telling you. I was there. When Randy Savage was with us at WrestleMania 7, when the Mighty Ultimate Warrior defeated him in a retirement match, and when a disgusted, sensational Sherry felt that she had to put salt in the Mighty Macho Man's wounds, I think there was some tears when Miss Elizabeth summoned all the courage in her 98-pound body to defend Macho Man Randy Savage against sensational Sherry. There were some tears when Macho Man lifted Elizabeth on his perch, on his shoulder, even though he was officially retired. Macho Man and Elizabeth were together after 2 years separated, over 2 years separated from the main event of February 1988 until WrestleMania 7, March 1991. I think there were some tears, Mike. I think I saw some tears. You probably were crying too, all the way in Long Island. You were crying in your tea. So, did Nikita Koloff shed tears on the cover of Wrestling 87 when he said, I shed tears for Magnum TA? I think he did. Did Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, ask for a little hug and a kiss from his son? His son, Dustin Rhodes, who Dusty did not make time for, who he just plopped down in front of the television and just went off to the road to chase bar waitresses and all the other things that Dusty did while young Dustin grew up alone in 1994, facing the threats of Meng and Colonel Rob Parker and Bunkhouse Buck and Terry Funk and Arn Anderson? Did Dusty Rhodes shed a tear? Did Dustin Rhodes shed a tear when they reunited? I think they shed a tear. So yes, there's been some tears in professional wrestling. So this young man, who's not even that young, he keeps saying he's 18 or 20 or 25. He's actually 35 years old. This gentleman who was in attendance in Chicago, who the cameraman decided to pick up and show his crying face with his mask pulled down, tears and snot running down his face, exposing his millennial emotions to the world, crying more than some people cry at the funeral of a child. And here he was, letting his raw emotions be shown to the world that Phil Brooks, CM Punk, Chicago-made CM Punk, Chick Magnet Punk, was there in person to fight for the honor of AEW, to cash those mighty Tony Khan checks. And you mocked that, Mike. You ridiculed it and said you should be thinking about Afghanistan. You should not shed tears. You should not have emotion. Well, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, God. I just went to see a wonderful movie. And in this wonderful movie theater I was in, I'm assuming that I'm going to be the only person in the theater. I'm seeing 12 Mighty Orphans football movie. I don't know what to expect. I get into the theater and I have had to reserve a seat, as we all do. And my seat is reserved in the back row where I like to sit, because I like to be back there, and I'm always multitasking. I'm lifting weights while I'm watching the film. I'm making the most of my time. I brought a notebook and pen for my own writings in case any great thoughts come to me while I'm watching the film. And as I'm going up to the back of the theater, I see a young man who's kind of shuffling oddly in his seat and acting like the cat who just got caught by the mouse or some such thing. And then, oddly enough, there's a young woman who's on her knees in the back of the movie theater. Now, I could have judged. I could have said, gee whiz, I wonder what these youngsters are up to that probably don't have their own place in the world to do such activities. I could have said something. I could have asked for the security of the theater or called the police and, had these people investigated. But I turned the other cheek, Mike. I allowed these two young fornicators to explore each other's bodies in the movie theater because I'm a nice guy and because I don't mock human emotions. These young people who are trying to survive in these worldwide conditions have no place to express themselves, probably no money to get a Motel 6, and they're using the movie theater as their personal makeout spot, like people in the 1950s used drive-in movie theaters, and I, turning the other cheek, allow them to express themselves physically with each other. Did I mock them? Did I say, hey, you kids shouldn't be making out in the theater? What about Afghanistan? I didn't feel the need to do that, Mike. I didn't feel the need to ridicule or diminish the horniness of these two. I just allowed them to carry on. And that's perhaps what you should have allowed. This crying, blubbering Chicago individual who felt the need to cry at the return of CM Punk will now be wearing sneakers from Nike, will now be getting a meet and greet with CM Punk. Who knows? He might be able to be allowed to eat sushi off the midsection of AJ Lee for all we know. We don't know how far this thing is going to go. We don't know what wave of a momentum his tears he can ride on and for how long. He might be in the pro wrestling industry. He might be hired as a writer. The WWE might give him a contract to be the new writer of NXT for all we know. Just to pull him away, the crying man, the crying guy. So, Mike, as you mock him and you just point your finger from Long Island's #1 pro wrestling interview show, and you bring on Missy Hyatt with all her years of experience, so to speak, and all these people, and you say there's no crying in professional wrestling. Well, I think we've illustrated that there is. So shed no tears for me. Shed no tears for the young people in that movie theater who might still be creating children right now. New AEW fans might be being hatched in that goddamn movie theater right now as we speak. And that asshole from Chicago will soon be running around with his size 12 CM Punk shoes. But in the name of Miss Elizabeth, in the name of Macho Man Randy Savage, Nikita Koloff, Magnum TA, Dusty Rhodes, Dustin Rhodes, Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair, I tell you, there is crying in professional wrestling. This has been Mike Messier. Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel for more of your pro wrestling content. Exclusive discussion, the AEW Apologist, here on the YouTube playlist of Monty and the Pharaoh.